Okay, we're into 1942 now. Germany sort of overextended itself in 1942. They were engaging in three fronts. They were being pushed out of North Africa by Patton and Montgomery. They were engaged with the Soviets on the Eastern Front, and they were engaged on the Western Front to some degree. With the British, who were flying RAF missions 24/7, 365, bombing German, fuel depots and manufacturing and trains and whatnot. So Germany sort of overextended itself in 1942, and that's kind of what started the beginning of the end for the Germans. First, we'll talk about North Africa. North Africa was a kind of pincer movement between U.S. General Patton, who had, the United States had now joined the war after Pearl Harbor in late 1941. So the first thing that the U.S. did in the European North African theater was to put Patton in the west of Northern Africa. And the British General Montgomery was in the east of Northern Africa, and they squeezed Rommel right out of Tunisia, right up into Sicily. And so North Africa campaign was won by Patton and Montgomery, kind of beating up on Rommel by squeezing him in the middle. When the Germans left North Africa, they went into Sicily. And so Sicily and Italy is the first place that the Allies kind of reinvaded the German territory. And so Patton pursued Rommel, or the Germans, right up into Sicily and then eventually into Italy. Italy was, kind of a rugged campaign, and the Italians and the Nazis together put up a pretty good fight, but eventually the Allies were able to, prevail in Italy. The problem with Italy is that once the Allies got to the north of Italy, they had to stop because of the Alps. So the Alps were a natural blockade from the Allies pursuing the Nazis any further into Europe. So really what had to happen was the Allies had to come up with a different plan on how they were going to get after the Nazis. And it couldn't be through the Alps in northern Italy. So now we get to 1944. 1944 was when the Russians finally sort of prevailed on the Eastern Front and started to chase the Germans right back into Germany. The Eastern Front was brutal in the sense that more people died in this battle than any battle in the history of warfare. There are battles over bridges in the Eastern Front where 600,000 people died. Just to give you some kind of perspective on that, throughout all of World War II, only like 250,000 Americans died. So there were individual battles where more people died, German and Soviet soldiers and civilians and whatnot, than all of the Americans died in all of the war. The Eastern Front was particularly brutal because Stalin's game plan on the Eastern Front was basically to keep throwing human beings in front of bullets until they ran out of bullets. So the Germans were killing Soviets hand over fist, but Stalin kept marching more and more Soviet soldiers and civilians out in front of the Nazis until they just overwhelmed them with sheer numbers. Just some stories. One of the things Stalin did was he had a brigade of Soviet soldiers set up just to kill retreating Soviet soldiers. So, either the Soviets were going to die fighting the Germans, or they were going to die at the hands of their own army in retreat. So many of them chose to stay and fight and die fighting the Nazis. Additionally, there's tons of stories about Stalin emptying his prisons, just putting, the prisoners out in the middle of a field and letting the Nazis kind of bombard it. The goal of this was once the Nazis started to kind of unload on these prisoners, then the Soviet army could kind of hone in on the Nazi position and then start to fight them. So there's tons of stories about the brutality of the Eastern Front, but eventually the Soviets were able to kind of prevail by sheer ability to kind of, outlast the Nazis and their ability to suffer, and started to push back on the Nazis until they pushed them all the way back into Germany. The estimates of Soviet/Russian citizens lost on the Eastern Front is somewhere around 25 plus million, and the amount of Germans who died fighting is around 3 to 5 million. Probably about 3 million on the Eastern Front and then 5 million in the total war. So once the Russians got a good push on the Germans from the east, it was kind of imperative that the Allied forces, the English and the Americans, could enter Europe in the west. So that's when Eisenhower, the U.S. general, led the invasion of Europe at Normandy. This is called D-Day. There's all kinds of stories about D-Day that I think I'm going to tell in the next session. But the big thing you have to take away from the Allied invasion of Normandy at D-Day is that the British and the Americans had to get into Europe before the Russians took over all of Europe. So not only was Eisenhower fighting the Nazis at D-Day, he was fighting so that they could at least take a chunk of Western Europe away from the Nazis before the Soviets could kind of get in there and establish themselves as a presence. So not only were they fighting the Nazis, they were also fighting to maintain a foothold for capitalism and democracy in Western Europe. So we'll stop there for now, and then I'll pick up on D-Day with the next lesson. Thanks.